On the 8th of September 2020, IRES hosted a seminar entitled Arms Control Talks as a Way to Survive in the New Cold War by Alexander Goltz. Alexander Goltz has an MA in journalism from the Lomonosov State University, and from 1980 until the mid-90s, he worked at Krasnaya Zvezda, a Soviet, then Russian, military newspaper. He has worked at a number of media outlets since then, and he is currently working at Ежедневный Journal. It's a website I would recommend very strongly if you'd like to read more of Alexander's work. He is also a military analyst for the New Time Journal in Moscow, and he has had a number of visiting researcher scholarships both at Stanford University, the Kennan Institute, and of course here at the Institute of Russian and Eurasian Studies in Uppsala University. It is my pleasure then to now give the floor to Alexander.
Thank you. First, I'd like to express my full gratitude to Uppsala University and IRES, which gave me safe haven for these 9 months to write this book. And believe me, I really appreciate it. To be honest, one can hardly find worth time for such kind of presentation, because now those who are strongest opponents to idea of nuclear talks with Russia can give their arguments openly. How can we speak with those people who poison their political opponents? How can we speak to those who press people not in their own country, but also in neighboring Belarus? And all this is, I understand pretty well all this stuff of arguments. But nevertheless, I want to stress my idea that in this particular situation, arms control talks are not only needed, but not only possible, but they are badly needed. It's one of few ways for survival now, and it's my basic argument. I must first to introduce my theory, if I can. I'll quickly pass through arguments I used not once in this audience. First, it's a new Cold War now, and it's no doubt for me. People sometimes wanted to start a discussion. Is it a Cold War, or should we name this situation in other terms? But in fact, it doesn't matter for me. I invaded my own term. Cold War is a conflict that cannot be solved militarily, neither diplomatically. We cannot solve this conflict militarily for obvious reasons. Both parts have nuclear weapons. We cannot solve this conflict diplomatically because values gap became bigger and bigger. Okay. We cannot solve this conflict diplomatically because values gap became bigger and bigger now, and we can see that we have something like quasi-ideology in Russia and total rejection of Russian approaches for revisionism, as people in the West stress, from the West. the problem of this new Cold War, the basic problem of this new Cold War is that Russia has no sources and that Soviet Union had in previous Cold War. We have Russia has no alliances. It has very old population. You cannot form 5 million armed forces. You have a weak military industry which cannot start mass productions of weapons. What Russia has nuclear weapons. And it's not occasionally that Mr. Putin reminds his opponents in the West approximately each week that Russia is not only participating in arms race. Now Russia is leading nuclear arms race because, according to Mr. Putin, Russia possesses now new hypersonic weapons, some nuclear engined missiles, and all other toys that permit. Some people speak about Russian nuclear superiority. It's extremely dangerous, let me say, because we can easily foresee how nuclear conflict can start. Not occasionally, Mr. Putin stressed that during Crimean crisis, he thought to put on alert Russian strategic forces. God knows what does it mean in reality, by the way, because Russian strategic rocket forces are on permanent alert. But in this situation, in new regional crisis, imagine Russia will move its troops to Belarus, for example. And imagine that in this situation, Mr. Putin will state that he put on alert Russian strategic nuclear forces. I have no doubt that Mr. Trump will state the same. And from that particular moment, all of us will become hostages of early warning systems. By the way, now Russia has only 4 satellites in this early warning system, which, according military experts, means only minimal readiness of this early warning system. I was shocked when I read in one book how many times American early warning system was wrong between 1970 and 1980. You cannot believe. It will be 20,000 times. 20,000 times this system gave wrong signals. It's no doubt for me that accuracy of Soviet and then a Russian early warning system is the same. So, but the problem is not the ability of Mr. Putin to threaten its partner. The problem is that until now we are ignoring the positive experience of previous Cold War. It is peaceful coexistence, which make soften these frictions between the countries. So, but if to speak about peaceful coexistence, our dear leaders showed themselves absolutely bad students. Look at this cemetery. It's not cemetery. It's destroyed system of network of international treaties all these treaties were destroyed in the last 20 years. Both sides, Russia and states, participated this process. The most strong blows, punches against systems of arms control, of course, is USA withdraw from INF Treaty. In my mind, it's one of the basic treaties that formed all the system of relationship in arms control between our two countries. Now, we have a START treaty, and I'm more than skeptical that this treaty will be extended in February 2021. Some of my colleagues who are experts in judicial issues, they counted that if we decide to extend this treaty just now, it will take something like 3 months for different judicial procedures, both in Russia and in United States. But what we can see now, okay, I'm not as pessimistic, of course, as I was 2 months ago. At the end of the day, Russian-American talks on strategic issues started in Geneva. Second, United States withdrew its awful precondition for China to participate in these talks, because it's absolutely clear that China have no political will and absolutely no need to participate in these talks. By the way, these talks are more or less, if miracles happen and China agrees to participate, it will put huge problems before states and Russia. Look, estimated amount of Chinese nuclear warheads is only 300. Russia and the United States have 1,550 strategic warheads each. So, if you participate in the talks, it means 2 options. First, Russia and China and states have to lower their ceilings to Chinese level, or give Chinese full permission to rise as far as their level. So, for me, when Americans first put these proceedings, I think that it's just a reason how to avoid these talks. Thanks God, States withdrawn this proposal. But now we have long list of problems that have to be solved. And for example, states proposed that new talks will cover not only strategic issues, but also non-strategic weapons, tactical weapons, middle-range missiles, and everything. The problem is that for 50 years of talks on nuclear weapons, no one managed to cover non-strategic tactical nuclear weapons, because for very obvious reasons. The delivery vehicle, when you start to first, when you start to cut, in order to start cut strategic weapons, you have two ways. First, you can cut delivery vehicles. And everybody knows that you can use strategic missiles, strategic bombers, nuclear submarines only for one reason: to deliver strategic weapon. When you deal with with non-strategic weapons, you can use artillery, tactical missiles, tactical aircrafts, everything, to deliver simultaneously non-nuclear weapons and nuclear weapons. So God knows how you can limit them, how you can control them. It's, by the way, there are great minds who proposed how we can do, but in my estimation, it will, the basic idea is to control not delivery vehicles, but nuclear warheads, non-strategic warheads. But in my estimation, it can take many years to understand the procedures. And by the way, it needs totally different, another level of mutual trust between participants, because you have to permit these people to come to your nuclear stockpiles. And I'm absolutely sure that sides will be unable to do something like this in recent months. So,
it shows in speaker view in the recording.
So,
which one was it?
So what's wrong?
It shows speaker view in the recording, so we wanted to look like that on the screen.
Share screen.
Yeah. So you really did something there.
Совершить показ слайдов. The last option.
This one. It's okay.
Yeah, now it's good. Use the arrow. When
Okay. Okay. So, unfortunately, the last 10 years, when both sides neglected the arms control, real schools of thought appeared which totally reject the basic idea of arms control. John Bolton is one of brightest representatives of this school. But we have also, for example, Sergei Karaganov in Moscow and his supporters, who insists that we do not need, for different reasons, we do not need arms control talks. First, because the so-called geopolitical situation is different. We have third player, China. Then technical progress is much quicker than those who participated in talks, and all other reasons. I don't want to touch his arguments now. I will attract to your attention to my friend Stephen Blank, prominent American scientist, great expert in Russian military issues. His idea is basically very strong. Pursuing arms control with Putin's Russia is mission impossible. I delivered a few lectures in Brussels in recent years, and believe me, people there support these views. The basic argument which moved me to the idea of a book is treaties will not work until we have no mutual trust. The level of mutual trust between Russia and other world is lower than zero level. So no uncontrolled talks is possible. And I asked myself, for God's sake, I can prove. Look, I am not a great fan for Mr. Putin's regime, but I am absolutely sure that this regime is not worse than Soviet Union. Soviet Union committed a lot of crimes. And what is interesting, in period when he was in situation, when he committed these crimes, Czechoslovakia, not Hungary, support for insurgents in Angola, Nicaragua, everything. Americans never stopped their talks with Russia on strategic issues. What was the reason? Why it had happened? And, oh God.
What happened?
And I found excellent quotation from Mr. Kissinger, which explained everything from point of view of realpolitik. While we should never give up our principle, we must also realize that we cannot maintain our principle until we survive. So there is a single issue which advocates for talks with Soviet Union, advocated talks to Soviet Union, as well as it advocates talks with Russia now. We have clear mutual interest to survive. And it's a basic thing we should keep in mind. And next idea came to me. In absence of mutual trust, this mutual trust is clear. The lack of mutual trust is clear. But in this absence of mutual trust between states, such trust can appear on the level of representatives of these states. And maybe it can help. So, what I was doing last 8 months, I was reading in parallel memoirs of Soviet and American diplomats and at the end of the day, I began to understand the very specific atmosphere. Sometimes it looks like a spy novel. Another day, I will show you, it looks as a Shakespearean tragedy. But sooner or later, each of these people, they moved first to mutual respect as a specialists, as experts, as wise people at the end of the day, and next to mutual trust. And I found dozens of brilliant stories of very specific relationship between Soviet and American diplomats. Of course, and I want to present you 3 of them, maybe the most bright stories. First, of course, Dobrynin and Kissinger and their back channel. Of course, all of us knew a lot about Henry Kissinger, but Anatoly Dobrynin is much less famous. But he was Soviet ambassador before 5 American presidents. And I think from point of view of diplomacy, this guy is absolutely genius. Because when you read his memoirs and in parallel with Kissinger, you are shocked, because a day about after National Security Council meeting, what President advisor Henry Kissinger is doing? He invites Mr. Dobrynin for meeting to tell him everything that had happened during this National Security Council meeting. I think it's totally unprecedented in history of diplomacy. Straight telephone secret line was made between Henry's room in White House and Dobrynin's room in Soviet embassy. It was unbelievable level of mutual trust. There were two, of course, Kissinger as well as Dobrynin, they were rather cynical guys. But at the same time, both of them are a real genius of diplomacy. They said, they met approximately, if you look diary, Dobrynin's diary, not less than 2 times a week. He met Secretary of the State. They were speaking absolutely openly, and they named it, let's fantasy. Let's speak as well as but from ourselves. Let's speak how this or that issue can be developed. And at this point, I must say that even if not to take mutual mistrust, states' ambitions, is extremely difficult, extremely complicated from technical point of view. Because in the end of the day, you have to compare potatoes and oranges. Strategic weapons, or if we take Soviet Union and states, was totally different. For example, Soviet Union has advantage in so-called heavy ABM, which can carry 10 or even more nerves, nuclear warheads. On the other hand, Americans had no such heavy missiles. On the other hand, states had huge superiority in strategic bombers. And those who conducted these talks had to find some kind of equilibrium, which tell that you can take 2 potatoes for 1 orange. We can change 1 heavy missile for for 50 strategic bombers or something like that. Don't forget that at the same time, technical progress developed. And during the talks, Americans, first Americans, then Soviets, deployed these nerves, then multiple re-entry vehicles. So then Americans deployed cruise missiles with their computers and everything. And let me say that it was extremely difficult task. And these two men managed to overcome all difficulties of the first stage of talks. I can say that level of mutual mistrust on first when talks started in 1970 was unbelievable. For example, a Russian Soviet defense minister was absolutely against these talks, and he said to Vladimir Semyonov, who is chief of Russian delegation, if you want to conclude some kind of agreement, you should choose between Lubyanka prison and prison of Moscow military district. He was not joking. Oleg Grinevsky, who participated in first talks, in first private talks, the same time when Dobrynin and Kissinger conducted their talks, on lower level, there were organized so-called private talks between Soviet and American diplomats. He had 2 microphones on his body. And it was a big shock for him when he understood that KGB guys, they wanted not listen what Americans were saying. They wanted to listen what he was saying. So, and I must say that these 2 guys, Dobrynin and Kissinger, they made real breakthrough in Russia, in Soviet-American relations, when they permitted to find all these equilibriums. And when they managed, when they supported to work on treaties, on first South 1 and ABM treaty. It was, and again, these results can be reached only in case of huge mutual trust. Another story, Akhromeyev. This man began, when he appeared in Reykjavik before American delegation, he immediately became superstar. The problem was that one of nuances of this arms control talks was that Russian Soviet military never gave Soviet diplomats concrete figures about armament they are talking about. You can, when I first read it, I cannot imagine. These people, they did not know the subject of the talks. And one day, American diplomats, to speed the events, they decided to organize presentation for Soviet diplomats about Soviet weapons. When the proposal went to Soviet delegation, chief military guy, it was Nikolai Agarkov, by the way, future chief of Soviet General Staff, one of the most prominent Russian military minds, approached his American colleague and said, please don't do so. Why? Because these diplomats, many of them have no access to secret information. So this story ended when Akhromeyev appeared. Americans were very tired of when Soviet diplomats did not know what to do, what to say. They began long, in their jargon, it was named philosophical speeches, speeches about nothing. Akhromeyev showed totally different approach because on one hand, he understood what he wanted. From another hand, he had all data. Sorry, not all data, but the bulk of data needed for these talks. There was a very funny story during the last days of INF Treaty. Akhromeyev arrived for the talks, and at the end of the day, he had to say Americans how many missiles Soviets had. In this crucial moment, Akhromeyev said, I don't know. Why? You are chief of general staff. I know only those weapons that are deployed, but I do not know weapons which are in industries' stockpiles. By the way, we usually can hear that Gorbachev and his people, they betrayed Soviet Union when they destroyed twice more missiles than Americans. The reason was that half of these missiles was located, not deployed in troops, but was located in stockpiles. So, Americans really, I mean, George Shultz, Paul Nitze, all of them really loved Sergei Fedorovich Akhromeyev, who showed huge knowledge, and he understands what can be done, what cannot be done. So, and it was until Reagan administration was in power, Schultz, Nitze, and others, Akhromeyev was huge superstar, and we can find in Schultz's memoirs, when I saw that Marshal Akhromeyev is in delegation, is included in delegation, I understood immediately that everything will be okay. But things changed dramatically with when George Bush and James Baker came. It's not because they were specifically against Akhromeyev. As his close friend, Admiral William Crowe, wrote, he wanted changes in Soviet society, but perhaps they came a little too fast for him. let me say that Mikhail Gorbachev used Akhromeyev rather cynically. This guy had huge authority among Russian troops, especially among generals. Everybody knew pretty well that he is absolutely not corrupted. Everybody knows that he is honest, and Gorbachev broke all system of military mentality with help of Akhromeyev, because under Akhromeyev umbrella, Soviet Union went to such concessions generals never can do before. Take INF Treaty, the same in START 1 Treaty. And I think it was very hard, very difficult for Marshall himself. At the same time, all his two things were absolutely saint for him: party and Soviet Union, and party and army. And we remember pretty well that all this wave of truth about Soviet army and Communist Party, which was printed in these particular years. It was too much for Akhromeyev, of course. And he was not a member of a coup. But when coup happened, he was in Sochi. He decided that he had to be together with his friends, who were members of the coup. And then he committed a suicide based on being an honest soldier. And look, again, it was very new for him. The best words about this man was found by Admiral Crowe. It's interesting because of Soviet-American talks. These two men, Admiral Crowe was chief of staff committee, of the United States, so they were in the same positions. And suddenly, very close personal relationship began. These people were real friends, and he wrote fantastic epitaph. He was a communist, patriot, and a soldier. And look, on his grave, these words were written on his grave. So, these two men who, bulk of their life, they planned to fight against each other. And on some level, they became real and close friends. For me, it's a symbol of how mistrust disappears and real mutual trust appears. The last story, very famous walk in the woods. I have not a lot of time, but it's a very interesting story. By the way, this story ended as a total disaster. At the end of the day, these men began to hate each other. But this walk to the woods became very famous story. It was the play in Broadway was put on Broadway scene, and and picture appeared with this name, Walk to the Woods. These two men found themselves in the unique situation. They were sent to Geneva to talk on INF with instructions not to do anything, just to read each other negative statements received from Moscow or DC. The irony is that at the same time, Ambassador Karpov and American Ambassador Rowney conducted talks on strategic weapons. And these two guys like this situation very much. They spent approximately 2 years discussing very important problem. Why there is 2 generals in Russia, in Soviet delegation, and only 1 general in America. And they exchanged very tough views on this particular problem. These 2 guys, they are totally different. They, sooner or later, both of them were ambitious intellectuals, and sooner or later, for me, it is a very clear case. When you put clever and ambitious guy, he will not, he cannot limit himself only by neglecting his counterpart. And sooner or later, ignoring direct orders of their governments, these 2 men went for the walk in the woods to think, without microphones, without CIA guys and KGB guys, just to discuss the problem. What can be done in this deadlock? And in history of diplomacy, the reality was a little bit different. I don't want to go to the details, but in history of diplomacy, this story came there as attempt of 2 wise people to do something without instructions, ignoring their own governments. Interesting story. So I come to the conclusion. First, what I'd like to prove with my book: negotiations on nuclear arms control in period of new Cold War are not only possible, but they are also necessary. These talks can become the institution that by virtue of internal logic can foster mutual trust, influence foreign policy, mitigate it. Because of the development of military technologies, this negotiation will require fundamental changes in traditional approach of arms control. Just 2 words what I mean. I think that we, if we'll be lucky to start new arms control talks, we should return to the situation of first stage of these talks. Now we discuss separately strategic weapons, non-strategic weapons, space weapons. I think that the time came to discuss everything in linkage. And only after we understand all these links between different types of armament, we can move further. And fourth, not the last. Such negotiations require significant changes in minds of politicians and society. Look, the problem is that no politicians, neither general public, understand now the real threat, which is not smaller than it was the threat during First Cold War. And we have to prepare for some very serious crisis, I think. Hope we will survive. Thank you.
They cannot clap, so we have to clap for them.
Thank you very much, Alexander, for a fascinating presentation. I will now open the floor to questions. It probably makes sense for us to start with those people that are in the room with Alexander. So I'll pass that on. I can't actually see you, so please, for the benefit of the camera, read your name. Yes, Zakhar.
Oh, thank you so much. That's very kind. Well, the question is with the premise. Thank you very much for the fascinating talk. But the question is with the premise, which I found a little bit as a translation scholar, because you said, well, the Putin's Russia is not as bad as the Soviet Union, but the translation is problematic because it doesn't, in some areas it's not as bad, in other areas it's worse. What happens, like with the use of Novichok, it's just a very different situation, and there's like this collusion between Trump's and Putin. It's unprecedented. So. This is nonsense. It's conjecture. Excuse me. It's conjecture. I didn't ask you. Well, I asked Alexander. I want him to comment.
Oh, come on. Look, first of all, Russia, Soviet Union was blamed in use of chemical weapons in Afghanistan, for example. But the question is totally different, I think. Again, there is no there is no goal higher than the goal of survival. We have no other chance to survive, in my mind, if we ignore arms control issues. So, if Trump will start talks with Mr. Putin on any other issue, regional problems, human rights, anything, not human rights, of course. But it's absolutely clear that in this particular moment, Trump will find himself under bitter criticism of from Democrats, from those who oppose him in the United States. For me, the goal to reach some agreement on nuclear issues, to lessen the threat, mutual threat, he advocates talks with anybody. Again, Soviet leaders were very cynical. They committed a lot of crimes. Nevertheless, Henry Kissinger started these talks and moved dramatically all this story with arms control. Jimmy Carter came to his office with his moral values, and he tried to move these moral values on the first front in talks with Soviet Union. By the way, at the end of the day, together with Soviet colleagues, American diplomats made excellent, very sophisticated treaty known as SALT II, but he never came in power because of moral obligations of Mr. Carter.
Okay. One more thing, because I was interrupted. Sorry. And the other thing, well, you believe in this sort of professionals and professionalism, but where are those professionals? It seems like the level of professionalism on both sides has been sort of disappearing.
Okay, professionals will not fall on you from heavens. Let me say that when Soviet Union started these talks, there was no department within foreign ministry which was connected directly with the talks. First, they started talks with American department. The people of from American department became great experts in this field step by step. I will say more. In whole Soviet Union, there were no system of decision-making on this issue. And they had to invade so-called Big Five and Small Five. The system of the commission, Big Five, it's a Politburo commission, included Defense Ministry, Foreign Minister, Secretary of Central Committee, Military Industrial Commission. But of course, these guys, they discussed a lot of very technical questions. And they had to develop so-called small five, the community of experts which discussed these issues of disarmament on permanent level. And believe me, it was the first time in Soviet Union when industry had to share with military their plans in development of different armament, and even more, both of them had to share their knowledge with foreign ministry. It was something, so again, experts, of course, if you say that nowadays expertise in Russia, as well as in states, by the way, is on very low level. It was strange for me when I suddenly understood that the bulk of military experts, with few exceptions, in states are even older than me. It's a huge generation gap here.
Can I ask, are there any more questions from the IRES? Yep, Greg, is it?
Yep, that's the one.
Thank you, Greg.
So, I mean, Sasha, if we look at the informational domain and the cognitive domain and compare old Cold War and, if we want, new Cold War, there seems to be a certain level of, if we put it diplomatically, degradation in terms of the logic and the conduct of political relations, international relations, and so forth. And I mean, you pointed out a number of the problems, and some of the additional ones. One can say, can you trust the US after it withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal? Second point, so that brings another dip in trust, but also the fact that a lot of the stuff is smokescreen. He said, and it covers what has been done covertly. And if we go back to the INF when that was cancelled, then you have several months later, US announces, we're going to test these new weapons. And these take decades before you get to the test stage, which means they were already violating the treaty, probably. And so you just get these imbalances, these smoke screens. This new Cold War concept, I mean, is used as an excuse to lower the level of discussions and to make a greater game of chicken. The only ones that seem to have any common sense are these ones who have retired. So you get these generals, US and Russian, who are saying, wait one moment, this is not going in good places. But the ones who are currently serving generals cannot afford to say that because politically they'll be chopped off. I mean, so 2 questions.
Okay.
First question.
Oh, so it was first question.
No. This is the situation. So the question is, I mean, theoretically, how can we back down from this one-upmanship which has been going on for a number of years? And secondly, is it practically possible at this stage?
Okay. Look, it's not first time when in history when technical progress, speaking about this cruise missile, this Tomahawk that was tested by Americans. I think, speaking specifically, Americans are ready for production of new weapons of new generation. And it's a concept. We will not spare money until we need to product immediately. It differs totally from Soviet and Russian approach, because we need to make as much missiles as we can in order to use it in proper moment because of weakness of our industry. But I must say that it's not first time, speaking generally, it's not first time when technical progress put serious problems before the negotiation. Recall this story with MERS, for example. When Americans deployed MERS and SALT 1 became totally useless. But step by step, sides moved to new understanding. I have to show you slide that I moved too quickly. Just a moment. Can I? Oh God. Just a moment. Oh, here. Look. If we start to speak technically, we have to link offensive strategic weapon with global missile defense, medium-range missile and Aegis ashore in Europe, medium-range missiles, hypersonic weapons, and limited areas of combat with limiting areas of combat patrol of strategic aviation and navy. So, oh God, what have I done?
Are you trying to share your screen or?
No, press escape, I think.
What shall I?
Escape. Everything okay?
Nope.
Press escape. Escape thing.
There.
Here.
Come away from it.
Oh, okay. Okay, can I close?
Yeah, there you go. You're back.
Fine. So, next question. Absolutely huge problem is system of verification. Because of sophisticated issues, you have to develop new system of verification. And you have also these fears. Nobody knows how to verify. cyber weapons, for example, or space weapons. It's extremely difficult problem. But again, the difficulty doesn't advocate us when we try to avoid this problem. And third point, I agree dozen% that all these, not only arms control system, but also all system of international relations, if you like, in military sphere, it's degraded dramatically in recent years. I can see, if you put this, I agree 100%, but do we have any other choice but restore it step by step?
There's no other option.
There is absolutely, that's directly what I wanted to say.
Excellent. I will now try to connect Natalia Bubnova, who is working at the Institute of World Economy and International Relations, and she will make a comment and also a question. I'll see if this will work. Let's see how we get on here.
I know her. It's interesting.
Hello, and I'll just see if I can get your camera working as well. There we go. Excellent.
Hi, from Moscow.
Hello, Natalia.
Hello, how are you? Well, thank you for the presentation. I totally agree with Alexander that arms control is needed and it should be included as an essential element in any future relations, whatever their process might be, whether they're positive or negative. Arms control should be an essential part. It should not be considered, as Bush once called it, a legacy of the Cold War, of the previous Cold War, and should not become a victim of the new Cold War. Not only to keep people in jobs like me, who dedicated to arms control a good part of their life, but because arms control was as essential for keeping us on this planet as all the arms weapons combined, I believe. Whether arms control is better off when we have good relations, or whether the risks and dangers can produce the need for arms control is a question of hen and egg. I think we should pursue arms control no matter what relations we have. Of course, I think that at times of better understanding and better trust, arms control was easier, but nevertheless, we should pursue it and try our best to succeed. Arms control brings predictability, brings more transparency. It is not the weapons that kept Arctic safe. It's not because of weapons that the space weaponization was stopped, but because of arms control. Our bilateral relations with the United States were better off because of arms control. The institutions and instruments for monitoring, verification were the product of arms control, and will and should be in place if we continue, if we pursue further on our arms control efforts. So my question is, what do you make of the statements by President Trump that he might want to pursue a treaty or continuation of the current New START treaty before the end of his presidential term? He mentioned it once, but I don't know how serious he was and whether there is a possibility for this. And as for Biden, he was one of the leaders of the arms control efforts in Obama's administration. So I think that with him, despite his negative attitude of Russia, the chances for arms control are higher. Do you think that there will be a possibility to manage to extend the strategic arms treaty before its expiration in the short period after the inauguration of the new president, if that's Biden? Remember the Fula gap that they talked about back in the Cold War period. Now I call this the Biden gap, or the start gap. There will only be less than a month or so to extend the treaty. And Alexander mentioned that his Russian friends here, his Russian acquaintances, colleagues here say that they need, that the government here needs 3 months. I read someplace the month and a half, but they definitely do need time for the legal procedures to extend the treaty. Do you think that it will be possible? What else can be done in the near future? Because we not only need to want it, but we need to make plans to make it happen. When Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream," he also had a plan for that dream to come true. Now we also need to not only have a dream, not only to dream on, but to push on and work further. Well, thank you.
Natalia, thank you so much. I really miss all my Moscow friends. And happy to see you.
We miss you here. Though I'm sorry, we lost the summer yesterday, so we only have the fall for you.
Okay, a great question. I think the problem is that we do not know first what Mr. Trump means when he writes this or that in his Facebook. Second, we do not need, cannot, at least I cannot understand what really American side wants. What can be done? We understand pretty well that the single thing that can be done in recent months, just to extend treaty, no more. When you raise such questions as non-nuclear, non-strategic weapons, space weapons, for God's sake, the discussion just to understand, not to solve the problem, just to understand it, it will take months, if not years. So, my best hope is, okay, next time Americans and Russians meet in Geneva, they agree to extend the treaty and write mutual statements of two presidents, Putin and Trump. In this statement, they will mention all types of weapons, such as non-strategic weapons, space weapons, cyber weapons, and promise to start immediately talks on control on new treaty that will cover this issue. And best case scenario, of course, to start these talks really, to restore these permanent talks in Geneva, where Russian and American diplomats and generals met not for 2 days, as it happened recently in Geneva, but speak permanently on these issues, have clear directives and instructions of their government. So, again, let's use the positive experience of previous Cold War to survive an existing one.
I would add a small question, just building on that, going back to the experience of the Cold War. There seems to be some big difference between how America views Russia and how it viewed the Soviet Union. Whereas in the first Cold War, the USSR was recognized as part of a bipolar system and almost like on an equal level. At the current moment, that kind of recognition hasn't been achieved yet. So I'll just add another question that Nick Nguyen has asked. about the Democrats coming to power, if they came to power in the upcoming elections, whether that would make any difference. So the kind of questions are interlinked. How does the American political establishment view Russia? How different is that from the Cold War? And what chances do we have of returning to the kind of equilibrium of peaceful coexistence?
I think, again, if you say that Russian reputation in our days, United States, is totally awful, I agree. If you say that division for two parts world doesn't exist, two-polar world doesn't exist now, I agree also. But at the same time, again, Russia and there is one issue where Russia still is equal to the United States. It is nuclear issue. We have, both countries possess 92% of all nuclear arsenal of whole world. So, if to speak extremely cynically, China is a great power, and its GDP is great, is very on international security and international policy is great. But truly speaking, China cannot devastate this planet. Russia can. So it's a reason. Again, I don't like this argument, but it exists, and we cannot close eyes on this real situation.
And if I could offer a follow-up question, and just to go back to the lessons of the First Cold War, at some point America did not trust the Soviet Union. There was close to an absolute breakdown in the relationship around the time of the Korean War. And after a period of time, this ended. There was the recognition of the need to work together and this kind of détente. I wonder what you think at the current moment, what kind of factors could potentially bring the level of trust back up from zero? What do you think?
Again, it will not, the mutual trust will not fall in our hands from heaven. Let's continue this scheme. First extension of START 1, then joint statement that we will try to solve these problems in new START Treaty, then permanent talks in Geneva, then step by step, not immediately, but step by step, this new community will appear. The community who speak the same language, who understands each other, understands terms, can exchange, and sooner or later, as it happened during Geneva talks, these talks became much more than just talks about nuclear issues. It became, so we organize some kind of environment, and in crucial situation, one colonel can say to another, guys, I want you to say something to your bosses, and I trust that you will say directly what I said you immediately. I'm waiting at the corner, at the bar on the corner of the street. So sooner or later, such environment will be built, will appear. Again, it will not happen in 2 months. But as far as I understand, this period of confrontation, unfortunately, this period of confrontation will last rather long period. So we have to prepare to long confrontation. And in order to smooth all this friction, all these problems, we need such institute as permanent talks on nuclear issues.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was a very interesting answer. And I will now read a question from Pavel Luzhin, who's an expert in Russia's foreign policy and defense.
All friends ask me the questions.
Excellent. Okay, I will read out this question. It's quite specific, so I hope you can hear me okay. Russia and the United States have a disparity in non-strategic nuclear weapons, NSNW. Moreover, Russia relies on NSNW in its military strategy. So is it possible to maintain the arms control regime today, unlike in the late 80s, without counting this type of nuclear weapon?
Oh, Pavel asked one of the most difficult questions in all this story. Because again, if we're speaking about non-strategic nuclear weapons, the situation look as a deadlock now. We will not talk until, say, Russian. We will not talk until you withdraw your nuclear bombs from Europe on your territory. If Americans strongly reject the idea to move these bombs and their argument is that these bombs are symbol of nuclear, of American nuclear umbrella over their European alliances. And we cannot remove it to American territory. So it looks a deadlock. And of course, but in case of political, I can give you another very interesting example. If we take experience of First Cold War, the problem of first front strategic elements was for a very long time. It was one of the deadlocks of talks. Soviet Union insisted that all tactical airplanes which can carry nuclear weapons, all tactical missiles, together with French and British nuclear forces, have to be taken under account. And the point of Soviet Union was rather logical. Okay, we name strategic weapons all weapons that can reach our territory, full stop. But there is logics. Here we can see that now we cannot find common place to marry American and Russian approach on non-strategic nuclear weapon. But it can appear. For example, I cannot see to be honest, I cannot see that 132 bombs looks like a real threat, real big threat to Russia, to Russian security. So, in my humble opinion, Russia can agree with the existence of these bombs on its territory, on the European soil. Next problem will be the number of nuclear warheads, non-strategic nuclear warheads, and how count them. It will be a difficult issue, and but I can foresee that if we have enough goodwill, it will be possible. Again, I'm thinking not about tomorrow. I'm thinking about possible decisions in few years. We put under mutual control our nuclear stockpiles. Don't forget that American inspectors sit near our missile plant in Votkins, and Soviet inspectors controlled the situation in Magna missile plant. So it can, if you ask me how, I cannot say. You have to spend years and years talking in order to develop the rules. But I'm more or less sure that it is possible.
I just wanted to check if there's any other questions at the Institute in the aquarium. If not, I would like to ask one more question, if I may. Slightly more global kind of level question about public awareness and public consciousness, and certainly nuclear arm controls and reduction was very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds in the 70s and 80s. And there is a sort of feeling that it's not the same case today, that this agenda, this question has slipped out of the kind of public domain. And I just wonder if you have any views on if you agree with this and what can be done to change it, or whether we are doomed to wait for some unpleasant incident to bring it back into people's consciousness.
Oh, look, Sergei Karaganov rather cynically wrote that we have a generation of smartphones, and soon we'll have the generation of Facebook. It's a problem because nobody. It's to be honest, it's a result of more than 30 years of peace in Europe, and there were no real confrontation between great powers, and we have a new generation of people, and also we have a new generation of politicians who also did not care about these dull strategic issues. Come on, we have many other important things to discuss. Migrants, racial problems, and all others. Politicians are interested in things that are interesting for their voters, for their electorate. And then it's a question, how explain this electorate that situation is very threatening? Unfortunately, I have to agree that it can happen only after some serious crisis. I hate, believe me, I hate to say this, but my feeling is that only after crisis of such kind, real things, real changes in public consciousness can happen.
Cuba.
Yes, you are absolutely right. Cuban crisis was a turning point, and only after Cuban crisis, both countries began to move to talks.
Seriously,
yeah.
Maybe just a reflection, Colin. Yeah, well, I mean, I think our confused poet friend doesn't really understand the intricacies of the current international relations scene. And one of these is the obvious transformation of the global order from unipolar to a more multipolar configuration. Now, traditionally, this one, Russia and the Soviet Union before it, has always been the other, ever since, well, 1917, 18, and one can even say before that in some instances. So this has been the convenient other. And so this is why you're getting these Russia gates, these degeneration of stuff. But also what we can see now is that the US has another threat because, I mean, in terms of its relative power, China is the actual realistic competitor, not nuclear-wise, but economy and other issues. And so this is now you're getting the China flu and all of these other things. But China, of course, as Alexander says, doesn't have the nuclear military capacity. And so one can see that these are going backwards and forwards. And so this seems to be triggered more from the US because they're trying to defend their position as the hegemon. So they're in a defensive position and so more likely to take risks, which they have been doing, in order to defend and keep that position. And of course, this provokes, from the other side, a response. And you can see this from both Russia and China at the moment. So, I mean, this creates an additional level of complexity and problems in dealing with the nuclear issue, which is then piggybacking on this greater global issue.
Alexander, if you'd like to respond.
Okay, to be honest, I agree. Look, again, my idea, why I concentrated on nuclear issue, it gives opportunity to forget about other topics such as China-American rivalry. If we take nuclear things, everything is clear. If we take under consideration all other issues, economy, political rivalry, everything, first of all, it moves us from this main issue, and it makes additional difficulties if we are thinking in terms of talks. Okay, I put you, I think I was very clear when I said, if you put China in these talks, you will have nothing to do. Because, again, Mr. Karaganov and his people, they speak about some multiple forums on which we will discuss nuclear issues together with all other issues in order and without any treaties as a goal. I am rather cynical. I know for sure that we can speak here with absolutely no result. And if we want to limit the threat, we need to come to more or less clear treaty that can be signed and verified. And it's not occasionally I took this nuclear issue, because it's one of few topics where you really, with huge difficulties, nevertheless, you can come to some treaty.
Excellent. And I will now return to Natalia Bubnova, who has an additional question, comment.
Yes, just one commentary, apropos. It is true that both Russia and the United States accuse each other of taking the lead in arms race and in presenting new threats to each other. They mirror each other in these accusations. The Russian side does have a lot to accuse the United States of. I'm finalizing a book on the military policy of the United States under Obama and Trump in the second decade of the 21st century. Yet, I would also like to state that to assist the arms control, and not only for that, but to make things right for the world in general, I'm sorry to use high words, both sides, and since I'm in Russia as well, need to try to refrain from pursuing the arms race. Alexander mentioned nerves. I used to believe that if the Soviet Union had acted differently, things might have turned out differently for it and for its future. It reached the capability to produce MIRVs in the late 60s, and I think it should have stopped there, showing the United States that it could do that but not pursued it, if that's possible, if that's perceivable, so to say. And Alexander also mentioned the SALT I and SALT II. Jimmy Carter, a politician of high moral values, and I believe that politicians can not only be cynical, but can be pursuing good politics as well. But in his case, the SALT II was not ratified, not because of his morals, but because the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan. Yes, it was prompted by the United States, and you know, in memoirs, American politicians claim that they drew the Soviet Union into that war by providing weapons to mujahids and so on and so forth. In any case, the Soviet Union, by doing this, prevented the SALT II from being ratified, although it was observed by both sides for a long while. So both sides should refrain from arms race, although military should be provided for and kept in good form, but not more than that, I strongly believe. And the foreign policy should be conducted in good spirits and without escapades, which are dangerous both for international community and for the country that implements them. That's it. Plus arms control in all scenarios.
Okay. Can I, Matthew?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you, Natalia. I must say, first of all, the problem is now that Russia is sure that it is leading the arms race. Each time Vladimir Vladimirovich tells us that we are running ahead. We have hypersonic weapons, blah, blah, blah. And it's a huge problem. And to add, I think it's a huge problem. The question of self-respect, the question of countries' self-proud is solved with the possession of these super weapons.
I think it's wrong, pure and simple.
And it's a problem. Again, speaking about Jimmy Carter and morale, in my view, all this condemns on Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, as Americans condemned Russian arose the story with Russian brigades on Cuba and Russian interference in Angola. Okay, when you try to tie arms control issues with other political issues, together with human rights, anything. It's a death of a treaty. It's a death. And for me, if to speak about ideal negotiator on arms control, Kissinger and Dobrynin are ideal negotiators. They pay no attention. They knew for sure that both countries can criticize each other for dozens of issues. But when they had clear goal to get agreement on arms control, they put aside everything.
Excellent. Well, I'll just check, are there any more further questions or comments from the audience or from the institutional room there? If not, then I will again say thank you to Alexander for bringing us into contact with this vital topic, and we all look forward to seeing his book, which I'm sure will set the mark for where we need to be to know about this vital issue. So I also will thank the audience for coming to life and sending us good questions and allowing us to have a fruitful discussion at the end. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, everybody, especially my friends in Moscow.